Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to Season 4, Episode 45 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we hope we prevail throughout Week 13 and the rest of the 2024 fantasy football season. The rest is coming very, very short at this point, but I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me today is Nick Cap, welcoming Nick back to the show. He's feeling a bit better than he was yesterday, so we're recording on Monday night. Was not feeling too hot on Sunday morning, so you guys that are watching our weekly content that also jumped in on the live show, we're checking in and making sure Nick was good to go. So he'll be back on for this Sunday for sure. But we welcome him back after an exciting week of football that featured a billion bye weeks. And if you had Saquon Barkley like me, you're very happy this morning or today. It's not the morning; it's at night actually.
But that is very true. You would be very happy, and we'll get into Saquon in a little bit. But man, you said it at the start of the show, Week 13, and it's flying by. And I started doing the math in my head, and it's like your fantasy playoffs are literally 2
weeks away.
Yeah, it's insane how fast the year has gone on.
I am so glad. I am so glad that one of the playoff rounds is when I'm away. I won't have to watch. Actually, I might be coming back on the Sunday. Ugh. Now that I think about it, I actually won't be away, really. So your fantasy playoffs, let's see, this is week 13, 14. So your fantasy playoffs start the weekend of the 14th and 15th, then 21, and then 28, 29. So that's your fantasy playoffs for 2020.
It's really not fun that they put the fantasy playoffs dead center of holiday season. It's like make or break for your holidays is your fantasy playoffs.
Well, it's fallen on Christmas or Christmas Eve a couple times actually in our league, and this is now maybe 8 years ago. I won the only championship I won in our league was actually won on Christmas Day. And I kind of had the win secured before the Christmas Day games. I think at that point there were only 2 games on Christmas Day, but still, there have been a lot of championships played on Christmas weekend. Especially we've had, I think in the past 8 years, I guess we did two Christmas weekends. So, and the NFL loves doing Christmas games now at this point. So that's
I guess so. We're adding that to the schedule.
Yep.
Nick, it's funny. Just real quick before we get into it. In our league, as we mentioned last week, I started selling. I said, my teams could make the playoffs, so I can't go on a run. And I make you a trade, give you Kyron Williams. And all of a sudden, my team put together its best week it's had in a very long time. We had Jalen Waddle redemption. We had Roschon Johnson hits the end zone. We had a solid week, and looks like we're back in the playoff hunt again after a big win.
Real quick, I'll just touch on this. And I took Nick's advice and traded for Jalen Waddle, but I did not play a few weeks ago at least. I did not play Jalen Waddle this week. I had a ridiculous week in a league that's not a high-scoring league. It's a small roster, no defense, no kicker. It's only a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 starters. So I played Geno, who didn't have a great game. He was okay. Jahmyr Gibbs at 24, Ken Walker at 13, McLaurin at 21, Pickens at 8, Laporta had 4.9, Barkley at 46.2, and then I have Quentin Johnston in there. I did not play Keenan Allen with 23 on my bench, and I did not play Jalen Waddle with 28 on my bench. So if I had played Waddle instead of Pickens and then Keenan Allen instead of Quentin Johnston, you're looking at maybe like an 170-point game. And I already won this week. I scored 130. I'm at 130 right now before Quentin Johnston plays. And again, this league, maybe a good number is 130s, but I could have had a ridiculous number this week if I played the perfect lineup. But
I have one league that's it's a 10 roster, no kicker. There's a three receiver.
You love no kicker. You love that.
I hate kickers in fantasy football. I'm so anti it. And I dropped 186 this week. Normal PPR, no bonuses or anything, and I had 4 players on bye, including Garrett Wilson, James Cook, and a couple others. So
that's what messed me up in our league. That's what messed me up in our league. I mean, I have Burrow, Baker, T. Higgins, and Devontae Smith got hurt. Anyway, welcome to the show. We bantered a little bit more than we normally do. This is our Tuesday show, and this is the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. If you join us for our live show this past Sunday for Week 12, thank you for joining. Hopefully, I was able to help you out as much as I could. I do appreciate when Nick's on with me, as we could both give different takes. And I know I missed some weeks, so I just wish there's a way that neither of us could miss a week, whether due to vacations, travel, sickness, whatever. Because I know sometimes we have differing opinions on the live show, and one of us is right, one of us is wrong, and hopefully you listen to the right one. But anyway, if you're joining us, thank you so much. On our Tuesday show, we do a waiver wire segment, which is getting shorter and shorter as the weeks go on, just due to the nature of the waiver wire. And then we give you our top 5 takeaways from that week of fantasy football, or at this point, maybe the season, etc. So without further ado, let's get into our waiver wire segment. Again, shorter and shorter as the weeks go on. For quarterbacks, Caleb Williams is owned in 37% of leagues. He had his best start and fantasy start of an NFL player. Unfortunately, the Bears lost again. 37% owned for Caleb Williams in ESPN leagues. These owned percentages are all in ESPN leagues. And then Jameis Winston owned in 10% of leagues. I would rather own Caleb, Nick. I wouldn't want to start either of these guys. At this point, you have to have a guy like Tua or Goff, and Drake May, Bo Nix. Like, I'm sure you have somebody, but if you desperately need a quarterback in a 14 or 16-man league, pick one up as a backup. But I don't know where you'd start either of these guys, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if I want to stash one in the case that one of the quarterbacks gets hurt, maybe I know there were rumors that the Chiefs on Christmas might shut down their superstars because they don't want the short week against the Steelers when they're going on that hopeful playoff run. Caleb is the one that I do want to own. I agree with Nick. I think he's looked a lot better since they fired Waldron. That offense looked the best it's looked in weeks, and we know that in these division matchups, it's going to be super high over-unders for the rest of the playoffs. So I do want a piece of Caleb Williams. If he is available in your league, he's someone that I would aim to roster.
On to running backs. Amir Abdullah owned in 19% of leagues. If you picked him up and started him, he helped you out. And Roshan Johnson, who we've given you the last week or two, has become a red zone threat, owned in 17% of leagues. I think they're both very rosterable. I don't know where you play them, but I think they're both very rosterable, especially if you need a running back.
Yeah, I agree. I think if I want one of the two, it is definitely Abdullah. He's looked the best of any of the 3 running backs for the Raiders so far. Got a little involved in the passing game, had high usage in the running game. So if we don't see Madison and White again, he's definitely someone you can start, where Roshan, he's gotten all the goal line work over the last 2 weeks since Waldron's been fired, which is definitely good upside and good roster. I just don't know if you'll ever comfortably start him unless he takes over the role for Swift.
I mean, Jonathan Taylor is a bye week in 2 weeks. There's still a couple bye weeks left, so you might need a running back. For wide receivers, David Moore is owned in 1% of leagues. Nick noted that since coming off the bye, I believe he said he leads the Panthers in red zone targets. I think that's the stat you gave me before the episode. Nick Westbrook Akine, I think we talked about him on our last week waiver show, and Nick had him as a deep dive guy on Friday. Owned in 7.5% of leagues, had another touchdown. I think he has 4 in a row now, 4 games with a touchdown in a row.
Yeah, he has 6 touchdowns in his last 7.
Okay. And then there's Devon Vale, owned in 2% of leagues. I told a couple of you guys to spot start him on Sunday. I was between him and Noah Brown. I think I ended up starting Noah Brown. But Nick, again, same situation. I think you could roster all of these 3 receivers. I would rather want Vale due to Bo Nix.
I agree with that. I think all 3 of these guys are the top 3 waiver wire guys on the week. I think they're definitely worth the hold into the playoffs, and you hope over the next 2 weeks one of them kind of exceeds and is worth starting. These feel like the names of players that you see in that random team that wins the championship, right? Like, one of these guys is going to be fantasy relevant, and you want to be the guy that rosters them. So if you're in multiple leagues, I recommend rostering them in each of them. I imagine one of these 3 will be on Nick and I's deep dive sleeper in a couple days. So definitely going to keep our eye out on these 3.
And lastly, we're doing defenses. No tight ends this week, guys. If Jonnu Smith available, go get him. Hunter Henry, if he's available, go get him. But there's really nobody else that we're worth mentioning. So some defensive streamers for week 13. And I don't think 3 of these defenses will be available, but we're just looking for positive matchups here. So the Chiefs hosting the Raiders, the Texans at the Jaguars, the Broncos hosting the Browns, and the Cowboys hosting the Danny DeVito Giants. They should have signed Daniel Jones, but they did not.
I like how you call him Danny DeVito. It is Tommy Cutlets, Mr. Nick. But that's all right.
That's how irrelevant he is. I don't even know the guy's first name.
Danny DeVito is the
really bad journalism by me. But he's actually he was the 3rd best quarterback on the Giants before they cut Daniel Jones. It's ridiculous that he's starting over our guy HCL, Mr. Drew Lock. You could figure out the acronym for yourself if you want.
Absolutely. We might need to change the horse to Giant after the new team name and the team change. But listen, I think that the Cowboys hosting the Giants. Short week. It sounds like Dable has entirely lost the locker room. Nick, did you see the interview with Dable after they announced they cut Daniel Jones or no?
No, but I did see Malik Neighbors, his interview, and they asked him why is he not gotten a target until they're down 30. He's like, I don't know.
So well, that's a problem too. But the report was, if you did see it, there was a lot of banging going on in the background, and people were wondering what that was. The report from a personnel person for the New York Giants was that was Darius Slayton slamming shit because he was pissed off about Daniel Jones. It sounds like the Giants have entirely lost the locker room. I'm sure seeing Saquon go off and be incredible is not helping that situation at all. I think the Cowboys on the short week, after you watch that special teams cook, the Commanders and the Commanders team would have had a lot less points in that game if they didn't get that 86-yard touchdown at the end of the game. You know, it can happen, but probably not happening too often against the Giants. I think that is a huge start on the week in the lowest over-under game.
It's Thanksgiving game too.
Yep.
Before we get into our top 5 takeaways, I just want to state, I see a lot of people saying, oh, the Giants didn't sign Saquon. Why didn't they sign Saquon? Well, Saquon wouldn't be doing this on the Giants because the Giants aren't a good enough football team. It means on an offense where A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith are taking the top off the defense in a much better offensive situation, great O-line. Like, it's easy to say, why did the Giants sign Saquon? He's 27 years old. The Giants are not in a win-now situation. Like, I don't blame the Giants at all for that one. They should not have cut Daniel Jones. But Saquon being there would not change anything to me.
I agree. I think the bigger problem is that they chose to pay Daniel Jones instead of Saquon Barkley.
That's fair. They should have just moved on from Daniel Jones as well. They shouldn't have paid either of them. That's what I would say.
I think I agree with that.
We're going to go to our top 5 takeaways from week 12. And the way that this works, if you're a first-time viewer of a Tuesday show, we just give you 5 takeaways. They're not ordered. Nick usually puts a theme to his takeaways. I usually don't do a theme to my takeaways, but we just talk about 5 things that we saw that week that we want to talk about. And Nick, I'm going to go first here because we're talking Saquon Barkley, and that's my first takeaway. And I texted Nick last night. Nick texted me late last night and said, hey, I did my 5 takeaways. Did you do yours? I'm like, no, I'm going to do mine now. Did you have Saquon? He said, no. I said, all right, talking Saquon. So let that be the first thing I talk about. 46.2 fantasy points in week 12. He had 255 rushing yards on the ground, 270-yard rushing touchdowns for you bonus guys like me and Nick, 47 receiving yards in the air. He had 58 fantasy points in my personal fantasy league that I have him in my dynasty league. I think it's the highest score in the season, I think. I don't think anybody scored higher than, I think maybe Chase. Chase had a ridiculous week.
Jamar Chase scored more in an individual game than
okay. So Saquon's the highest running back at least.
Yeah.
Ridiculous game. If you needed a big-time performance in Sunday Night Football like I personally did, I was facing Hurts, Puka Nacua, and A.J. Brown, and I think Saquon outscored them in my league. So I think so. I'd have to look at the score. He's a running back 1 on the season currently, and we're doing this before Monday Night Football, but barring a 40-point performance by Derrick Henry, he will be your running back 1 after week 12. Those running backs will actually face off next week. That's amazing. Mm-hmm. He has 6 games over 25 fantasy points. He has 392 yards. People are starting to put him in the MVP conversation on a year where no quarterback has really separated themselves. That's wonderful for your fantasy teams, and here's why. The issue with Saquon Barkley is the stupid tush push. But if the Eagles start hearing these MVP rumors and want to get their guys some padded stats, they'll start giving him the ball in 1st and goal instead of the tush push. Maybe not, but I think that will be helpful. But anyway, we said before the season that we both thought Saquon Barkley was going to have a much better season. I have to go back into our shows, but I remember I read off the stat that
we both said the Eagles would be the best offense for fantasy, and we both love Saquon Barkley's value in fantasy. We were both all over him.
Yes. I remember one thing I read off on one of the preseason episodes is that the Eagles scored 200 more points than the Giants last year and 20 more touchdowns. So I said that'd be so much more opportunity for Saquon to score. And again, we were both right on that. So I'm happy that I read that off. But anyway, the takeaway is just simply that if you have Saquon Barkley, congratulations to you, because he also has a ridiculously good playoff schedule. I remember I read this off a couple of weeks ago. And this is one reason why I traded for Saquon Barkley personally. Your playoffs. So, I mean, these are your next 5 games. You have Ravens, Panthers to get you in the playoffs. They allow the most rushing points to opposing running backs. Then you have the Steelers. It's a tougher one. And then you have the Commanders and the Cowboys. As of right now, the Cowboys allow the second most fantasy points to running backs. The Commanders are roughly middle of the pack, but good playoff schedule right there for Saquon. So, what is your first takeaway from Week 12?
So, real quick, we'll get to the theme as we always do. Since we are late in the season, we'll talk a little bit about what I guess it means right now, but mine's going to be a little sneak peek to next year's draft. And if you're in Dynasty, definitely some strategies that I got and some guys that I like for it. So the theme is the future of the franchise. And Nick, you talked about Saquon Barkley, a running back that just came off a huge game, his best game on his new team, a guy that just got paid a bag to leave his former team. And what better transition from that running back to Josh Jacobs, who, once again, Nick and I are all over it, always follow the money. They always, when you see a guy get paid, and Saquon got paid, and so did Josh Jacobs, it means they're going to use you. And I said it since week 1. I thought Josh Jacobs was a tremendous value. And I thought through the first 6 weeks of the season, he was one of the biggest outliers in fantasy. From week 1 to week 6, he only had 1 touchdown with some of the highest usage at the running back position. He only finished in the top 10 once, and he was the RB10 in that week with 16 points, which was a super low game. So he was not having the monster season that his production said. He was having a Najee Harris-esque season where the numbers say, the volume says he should be doing better, but he just couldn't find the end zone. Well, since week 7, he's got 7 touchdowns in 5 games. His last 5 performances, 20, 26, 13, 23, and this past week, 29 points. Nick, you worry about the tush-push with Saquon Barkley. Josh Jacobs got 3 touchdowns this week, all within 1 yard of the end zone. We love to see that from our running backs. He had 3 top 5 weeks within that span in the last 5 games. So he would have been the talk of the town if Saquon Barkley did not do what he did with these 3 touchdown, 100-yard game. And he missed some time in the game because he was injured, and they pulled him early from the game because they just absolutely crushed the 49ers. So good for Josh Jacobs, and he is somebody I will always be targeting in my leagues and somebody that I think you should be targeting in your dynasty because this offense is young. It's explosive. He got paid a bag. He is there for another 3 years on this contract, and he is one of the youngest running backs on that year 2 contract. He is only 25 years old, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah, there's no way somebody on the show traded Josh Jacobs a week ago. Not a chance.
Yeah, no shot. Absolutely.
In Dynasty, I traded him for T. Higgins. I traded him for T. Higgins.
That's not terrible.
Depending on his spot. I wanted to get him off the team, and I wanted a receiver. I just traded for Barkley as well. And okay. I kept a different running back, and I'm going to talk about him. That's Jonathan Taylor, who is going to lose fantasy leagues. How old is Jonathan Taylor? I'm gonna really upset myself right now on the air. Jonathan Taylor's also 25. Okay. Yeah, we're both, or he's a 99 baby. Okay. All right. I don't think get too upset at myself. He was like 26, 27. I was going to be like, ugh, but all right. Taylor's your running back 25 on the season. He has under 10 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. He hasn't cracked 20 fantasy points. He's only cracked it once this season. He's running back 23 on the season, his average of 13.9. He hasn't scored a touchdown in the last 4 games. He only has 7 receptions combined in the last 5 games. And now he's left with matchup against the Patriots, the Broncos, Titans, and the Giants. The defenses have figured out a way to play the Colts, and it's just load up the box with 8 and beg Anthony Richardson to beat you and be accurate, which he can't. So I can't believe that the worst quarterback Jonathan Taylor's ever played with is Anthony Richardson. It blows my freaking mind. He's played with guys like Flacco and Matt Ryan and Carson freaking Wentz. I had Jonathan Taylor in 4 leagues when I won 3 championships and points prize. And I won $2,000 that year with Jonathan Taylor. I can't even tell you who the quarterback was. I bet it was Carson Wentz. I can't, was it 2020? Whatever the year was. It was 2021? Has
it been Wentz?
2021. Colts quarterback 2021. I need to figure out who this was because I'm going to lose my freaking mind. Because he's too talented. He's not the problem. And I want to state that he might be the problem for your fantasy team. Well, the first one here says Sam Ehlinger. I know it was not Sam Ehlinger. Was it BDN? Might have been BDN. Let's see. 2021. It was Wentz. It was Carson Wentz. Kills me. Anyway, unfortunately, Taylor's going to lose you leagues, and his ADP will reflect it next year, but it's not his fault. We need a Saquon situation where we get Taylor off that team because it's not his fault.
No.
Alrighty, Nick, your next takeaway.
So you talked about someone that you traded away, unfortunately, in Josh Jacobs. Well, let's talk about someone I did tell you to trade for, who did just have his best game of the season, Jalen Waddle. Very long overdue for one of these. He had 8 catches on 9 targets, 144 yards, and a touchdown, 28 fantasy points. Yep, that'll definitely help you. And listen, man, the Dolphins are looking much better with Tua. We've seen it from Achane. We've seen Tyreek's numbers go up. Now we've watched Waddle have his best game of the year. Listen, these two have been busts. Waddle and Tyreek have been busts. But I'm going to tell you something. I'd much rather have Waddle than Tyreek for the rest of the season. And definitely, obviously, if you're in Dynasty, Waddle.
I just traded for both.
Okay. Well, I think Tyreek, you probably got good value on.
Different leagues. I traded for Tyreek. I traded James Cook. For Waddle, I traded. It was a running back.
It'll come to you.
Oh, yeah.
So here's what's happened. Waddle, for the first time since week 1, scored over 10 points. Yeah, that's rough. That's a rough season. Tyreek, who has the upside to break open your fantasy game, at least that's why we drafted him at the 101, 102, 103 this year. He hasn't broken 20 since week 1. So we could say all we want about it. Okay, well, that'll work for you. So listen, Tyreek is not who he was last year. I'm going to make my bold prediction and say I don't think Tyreek Hill will be a Dolphin by the trade deadline next year. I think he's going to be off of this team. And I think Jalen Waddle is going to assume that wide receiver 1 workload. And I think the comfort from that starts from here to the rest of the end of the season. He has a few very easy matchups. He's got some tough matchups to the Jets, although he always overperforms against the Jets. I think that he is going to look very, very good for the rest of the season. It was my prediction halfway through the year. I see Nick's smug face ready to rip my Jets for something.
Oh, it's this Sunday, baby. Jets Hawks.
It is Jets Seahawks this week.
It's Jets Hawks.
Chat about that. Good Thanksgiving weekend game.
Tony G thinks the Jets have a better chance of starting like a random quarterback than Rodgers because it's just like that's like the random game where like the random quarterback would go off against the Hawks.
I hope not. Anyway, my point being, I like Jalen Waddle. I think he's going to be very good for Dynasty. And I think if you were uncomfortable starting him and benching him, I'm telling you, I think there's going to be a lot more of these double digits and high ceiling games for the rest of your season for your fantasy playoffs. I think he's going to turn it up, and I think he's going to win some people leagues. I hope you did trade for him a few weeks ago. I don't think this is going to be an outlier. I mean, maybe 28's an outlier, but I think that 15 to 20 range is the rest of his season.
Okay. My third take is another running back, and it just reads Kyron Bum. Last 4 games, 10.5, 11.2, 8.6, 11.2, all on PPR. He's only cracked 100 yards once this season. He doesn't have a target in the last 2 games. That's a problem. He had a lot of targets last year. He also has 4 fumbles over the last 4 games. So as somebody that just traded my co-host for Kyron Williams, I am not happy about it, and they need to fix that up right now. Take number 4 or 3.
Yep. So face of the franchise, future of the franchise. I think someone has a very interesting season that we have not talked about enough. It's anyone in the fantasy community. Some have, some haven't. In CD Lamb, the one guy that's kind of been really overshadowed in this Cowboys drama through the rest of the year. And he's going to be the toughest player, I think, to judge at the end of the season. But I'm going to give you some numbers that I really like. So even with the rough year that he's kind of had, he's still the wide receiver 3 over the year. The problem was that he's not been the wide receiver 1 that he's been drafted to be. And you don't need to finish as the wide receiver 1 to be a bust if you're the 101 or 102. You need to finish in the top 2, top 3. The problem is you need your player to go win you weeks, and that is something he has not done. He only has 2 games this year under 10 fantasy points, which is a very good floor. I think both of those were 8.5 or 9 points. But he only has 2 games over 20. And one of those was 40 points against the 49ers, which will definitely help. But he only finished in the top 12 twice, and that's not good. The workload has been fantastic over the last 6 games, or since week 6, which I guess is 6 games. He's having 12.8 targets, and he's still not breaking that threshold to be a superstar elite receiver. So all I'm saying is next year when we are talking about fantasy and we are talking about who you take at the top of your draft, CeeDee Lamb is going to finish in the top 5 this year, and he's going to be drafted in the top 5 next year. He might be drafted in the top 3 again like he was this year. But I do not want him if he cannot be explosive like Jamar Chase and go get you 48. Or like Amon-Ra, who went on a crazy, I think it ended this week, but he had like 7, 8, or 9 games in a row with a touchdown. Or Terry McLaurin, who could bust open an 87-yard touchdown with a quarterback going into his sophomore year. Or I know Justin Jefferson had a bad
as well.
But a guy that can go ahead and get you 30 in an individual game and go win you a week. Because CeeDee Lamb has not done that enough this year to warrant the 101 and to deliver on ADP. He's just been a safe floor, low ceiling guy, and unfortunately that doesn't win you fantasy championships.
Let's talk about another trade. I mean, honestly, I should have named this segment like, this should have been the My Trade segment. I traded for Saquon. I traded Jacobs instead of Taylor. I traded for, well, that was your take. My third take was Kyron, traded for Kyron. I also traded for Travis Kelce 2 weeks ago. And guess what I have gotten out of Travis Kelce for 2 weeks? I should have gotten 18.3 fantasy points 1 week, 22.6 fantasy points in the other week with 4 total touchdowns. Those numbers actually came from Noah Gray. And every time Noah Gray has caught a touchdown pass, I've gone, yeah, and then it's not Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce has done 2.8 and 12.2 with targets of 4 and 8. So he is getting targets. He had 8 targets this week. He had like 12 fantasy points, which is actually good without a touchdown. I hate to complain, but anyway, stop the Noah Gray nonsense. It's not fair. He gets in the end zone and we think it's Travis Kelce, and it's not Travis Kelce. It's not fair. Stop it. Stop it. Because this happens the 3rd week in a row. Then it's a trend. Then it's a problem for me.
Sure.
Take number 4. My 5th take actually does not have a trade. So no theme. I've done it a couple times. I've done 4 out of 5 in the theme.
So, Nick, this transitions perfectly to my next point, which is Noah Gray, who we talk about follow the money. We forget that Noah Gray was paid before the start of the year. He was drafted in 2021. They gave him a 3-year, $18 million extension right before the season. We said, what the hell is this about? And turns out it's coming effective. One of the things I did not notice about Noah Gray, and I don't think anybody really did unless you're a Chiefs fan, is he's had over 50% snap share every single game this season. He has now had back-to-back great games. Nick talked about it, 18.3, 22.6, where Kelce had 2.8 and 12.2. The 3 games before, Kelce did score over 20 in all 3 of those, which we don't talk about enough. But in the other 2, not great, and Noah Gray starting to come on the scene. So I am not saying this is the end of Kelce for this year, but I do not think that he will be a Kansas City Chief next season. I think he is going to hang it up, especially if they could win the Super Bowl. I think it is the end of his career as we know it. And for what that tells me, if you are in a keeper format, a dynasty format, go pick up Noah Gray this week. We didn't talk about him on the waiver wire segment. I intentionally left him off to say it here. I like Noah Gray if you are in one of those formats, and I really like what his ADP is going to look like if Travis Kelce does retire, because this is a tight end that was paid a year early. We talk about it with our receivers. Jamar Chase, you wanted to pay him this year so you could avoid the holdout and all that other stuff. Well, the Kansas City Chiefs did that with their backup tight end. So I think Noah Gray's got huge upside in the future, especially being Patrick Mahomes' tight end replacing Kelce after what we've seen these last 2 weeks.
Okay, I will pick him up in my dynasty league. And I did trade for Kelce in my dynasty league, knowing I'd have like 5 weeks out of him literally on my team. And I want to win a championship. I want him to go all in. That's why.
Well, you should definitely get him in the league you own Kelce, because if Kelce retires, then you get Noah Gray.
Yes. And my roster in the dynasty league is very good. I mean, it's Burrow, Saquon, Taylor, receivers fluctuate, but it's usually like Debo and Higgins. And my flexes are Tank Dell or Quentin Johnston or Juwan Jennings. I feel like I'm missing one big piece on my team right here. As I open up my phone, Malik Neighbors. That's the big piece that I'm missing. I have Keon Coleman. I don't know if I play him any of those guys. I also have Olave on my IR and Goff on my IR.
Damn, all right, that's a freaking good team.
I wish Godwin didn't get hurt. All right.
Yeah.
My last takeaway, and Nick harped on this last week, so I forgotten Nick harped on it, but we're going to double down. Bo Nix is your starter for the rest of the season if you have him, most likely. He's a quarterback 7 on the season. He now has an average of 18.3, which is the 9th highest among quarterbacks. He has 8 consecutive games of double digits. 5 of those are over 19 fantasy points. He has 2+ touchdowns in 6 of his last 8 games. He has 200+ yards per game in 7 of those 8 games. And over his last 9 games, he has 19 total touchdowns, including 3 rushing touchdowns, 2 interceptions with 1 fumble. He has an easy schedule going forward. The Browns, the Colts, the Chargers, and the Bengals. If you get the championship week and you have that Bengals defense, the Bengals will probably be out of playoff contention, and their defense has already been bad for the most part. He might win you a fantasy football championship between the defenses of the Colts and the Bengals. You might want a different starter for that Chargers week, but Colts and the Bengals, I would love to eat that matchup up alive if I'm a Bo Nix owner.
Love it.
All right, number 5, last takeaway from the week.
I want to talk about another tight end that I don't think Nick or I have talked about maybe at all on this show. Honestly.
Is it Kizzy?
It's Trey McBride. I would love to talk about Okonkwo and those sleeper Titans that I've been saying since.
You're right. I don't think we have spoke about McBride. Not good or bad. He's been solid,
irrelevant to us, frankly. But he is coming off a dominant game. He is the tight end 1 on the week at the moment. 12 catches on 15 targets coming off the bye, 133 yards, only 1 touchdown this season. So he is doing it the opposite of the Sam Laporta way last year. Laporta was so touchdown heavy. Trey McBride is so catch heavy. And he is the number 1 pass catching option for Kyler Murray. And that is going to be very important to note as we reassess Marvin Harrison Jr. going forward, who had another very bad, inconsistent game. He now only has Marvin Harrison has only 2 games this year with 8 targets. And Trey McBride has 5 games with 8 targets. That is extensive for the tight end position. He's going to be Murray's favorite target this year, and we know it's going to happen next year. So I think that him and Bowers should be the 101, 102 at the tight end position next year. I think that's kind of the way that it is trending towards right now. We'll see how Kittle comes and does for the rest of the year. We'll see if Kyle Pitts gets back to that explosiveness, but those 2 guys, both of them in Bowers and McBride, but specifically McBride, have been very dominant, and it's been so quiet for the last few weeks that I think we need to shed some light on it, especially because Marvin Harrison was drafted to be this stud receiver at your end of your first round, beginning of your second round, and Trey McBride outperformed him all year on the same team as a guy drafted 2-3 rounds later.
All right. Well, those are our top 5 takeaways each from week 12, our Tuesday show. We will give you guys a show, I think on Wednesday. I think we're going to drop it right before Thanksgiving, so we could talk about the Thanksgiving games and such instead of a Friday show this week. And then, of course, we will be live this Sunday, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram to get you ready for the rest of the week 13 games. So if you enjoyed the show, if you're a first-time listener, maybe not a first-time listener or watcher, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell icon so you get notifications every time we go live. Drop a like on this video and any video you watch in the future. If you like to consume our content on audio streaming platforms, we are available everywhere: iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and Anchor. If you're on iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. We would appreciate that. We're also on social media. I know we don't do a live show during the week, so if you do have any questions, hit us up on Twitter, Primetime FF Pod, or Instagram, Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks again for watching and supporting. I guess we'll talk to you before Thanksgiving, but for the time being, set those waiver wires, and we'll talk to you guys on Wednesday.